Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have just been watching there a joint news conference by President Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. They've been holding several hours of discussions with their teams, discussing a range of issues, the main one being the situation in Ukraine. President Trump there saying that it was a productive meeting. That's how he described it. And he says his next job will be to make some telephone calls to call European leaders as well as President Zelensky of Ukraine. This is, after all about Ukraine. He's going to call the Ukrainian leader to let him know what transpired at this meeting. But generally, the tone from both leaders was that this was a positive meeting. He said that they did discuss Ukraine. They discussed issues beyond Ukraine as well, including possibly renewed business relations between the United States and Russia. So there's much to discuss. Let's get straight to our panel. Joining me from Moscow is Dmitry Babich. He is a journalist and political analyst. Also with us from Kyiv is Peter Zalmayev. He is director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Joining the discussion too is Anton Fedyashin. He is a professor of history at American University, and also with us is William Lawrence. He is a professor of political science and international affairs at American University. Welcome to all of you. Peter Zalmayev, let me start with you. What did you make of that very brief news conference?
Well, I was telling that the leaders decided not to take any questions. It seems that Vladimir Putin is elated and he's showing his elation at the very fact that he was invited to meet on the American soil, the American president. He received a red carpet treatment, quite literally. And Donald Trump, once again, his rhetoric, other than this sort of a thin silver lining for us in Ukraine, when he said that I have to consult, of course, with our European allies and with the Ukrainian president for any deal to go through. That may sound reassuring, but still, the rhetoric is such that the American president made it sound like both the Russian president and the American president as peacemakers. They're united in this desire. It almost feels like, well, it's now up to the Ukrainians to say what they have to say. But once again, we're in this kind of murky waters. We don't know what was said. We don't know what potential, opening up of economic relations will look like, and if that will come before any solid peace is reached in this war.
Dmitry Babich, if we look at what has transpired today from the moment that the two leaders stepped off their airplanes in Anchorage at that Air Force base, met each other, shook each other's hands, they got into the same car and left the Air Force base to go to these meetings. If you look at the body language, listen to the tone of the language that they used at this news conference, what do you draw from that?
Well, it looked normal and friendly. And to be frank with you, I am surprised and a little bit angry at the reaction of the Western media, which immediately started demonizing this meeting, saying that somehow Trump is ensnared by Putin's charms, Trump is fascinated by Putin. No, Trump is a serious politician, a real political animal. He knows his business very well. And I think, this demonizing reaction of the Western media shows who is really wishing this summit a favor. I mean, the tone of the European media was, I don't expect anything from this meeting, and I want it to fail. That was one of the commentaries that I heard on France 24, one of the main European channels. My wish is the opposite. I want this summit to succeed. I want the war in Ukraine to stop, but obviously I don't want it to stop in the way Russia haters want it to be stopped. They just want a ceasefire now without any agreement, without any conditions. That would be just a break and a respite for the Ukrainian forces at the moment when Russia is advancing. What I think should be achieved is some kind of a compromise agreement between Russia and Ukraine, supported by Europe and the United States. And I hope what was achieved in Anchorage is an agreement to pressure Europe and possibly Zelensky to accept a certain compromise. That, the terms of this compromise, I think only the negotiators in Anchorage know. But I hope this will be a compromise acceptable for both sides that will end this terrible conflict.
William Lawrence, what we have seen thus far was big on symbolism, big on optics. It was almost a made-for-television production if we look at what happened at the airbase when these two leaders first met, but not much in the way of detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not just political theater, but it's got a lot of political theater. And then we had several scripts of what might occur, and Trump was foreshadowing all week, if this happens, this might happen. If this happens, this might happen. And then if we look at sort of the Trump checklist on what he was trying to gain and what he would do if he got what he wanted, that's not exactly what we got right here. I mean, he didn't walk out, but he didn't take questions, and he didn't announce the ceasefire that he said he was there for. And he said there'd be a 25% chance of failure, and that would be defined in many ways, but in part by not getting a ceasefire, and we didn't get it today. So I don't think this was a total failure, but it was in no ways a total success. And the idea that somehow the solution is now for the United States to pressure Europe and Ukraine into accepting a compromise solution that's very much on Russian terms I don't think that's where this is going. The fact that Trump didn't take it solo, like he did in Helsinki, the fact that he brought in Rubio, who is a hawk on Russia and quite pro-Ukrainian, although he does work for Trump, and Witkoff, who's shades a little more towards Russia, into all the meetings, and then Trump announced nothing, suggests to me that those phone calls that Trump's going to make are going to maybe move some chess pieces forward on an eventual further discussion. But the supposed sort of agreement on most things that Trump was announcing was probably agreement on things that aren't the most controversial. And what he called the one big thing was probably about territory and things that Ukraine just can't do. So it is what it is. It's good that they spoke, in my opinion. It's not good that they spoke in Alaska, with Putin being an indicted war criminal and all the horrible things he's done. But the fact that they met and spoke, and the fact that some phone calls have been made, and the fact that a lot of people want this war to end, including Trump, that's all good.
Anton Fedyashin, right now it's a bit of a guessing game on what exactly was agreed on until we hear what these two leaders came to agreement on. But, to William Lawrence's point that the important thing is that this meeting took place, what is your opinion?
Well, I agree with William on this. This is diplomacy in action. And by the way, the fact that this meeting was neither a success nor a failure in the total senses of the word puts it in the 95% range of all diplomatic meetings, very few of which are either complete failures or complete successes. That's the nature of diplomacy. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes closed doors quite often. That's the best kind of diplomacy, the quiet kind. It's very difficult to judge about what exactly was agreed today because we simply don't know. But within the next 48 hours, I think we will be finding out what the conditions to move forward are by the reactions first from the Ukrainians and then from the Europeans, and that's what the whole world will be watching over the next 48 hours.
Anton, did you get the impression from those very brief comments that President Putin made that these discussions were not totally centered on Ukraine, that they talked about other things as well? I mean, President Putin talked about the closeness of the two countries, the fact that they had defeated a common enemy at one time. He also talked about the fact that there'd been no summit for the last 4 years and that relations had fallen to their lowest point, and that both sides did have legitimate concerns as far as security was concerned in Europe as well as internationally.
Yes, absolutely, Anand. Ukraine, of course, was the center of the discussion in terms of being the biggest problem, the biggest obstacle to the restoring of relations, especially diplomatic dialogue, especially between the U.S. and Russia. But you could also tell by the composition of the delegations that this was more than just about Ukraine. If that had been the case, then we would have seen the foreign ministers, the head of the Department of State, and then the Secretary of State, and then maybe the military leaders there, and that would be it. But the Russians brought a delegation with a lot of economic figures in it, and so did the Americans. And so the plan was to break up into smaller working groups. I guess we'll be finding out about whether that happened and what was discussed and whether something at all was decided maybe by tomorrow or the day after. But clearly both sides prepared for a much wider ranging discussion than simply the question of the peace in Ukraine. And my sense from the general tone of the Trump administration, despite its vacillations, sometimes wild vacillations that we've all witnessed over the past few months, is that Donald Trump wants to extricate the United States from the Ukraine project and get on with what he considers, for better or for worse, right or wrong, as American priorities. And that's the Indo-Pacific region, where the Russians will be a factor, whether they're on the side of the United States or an opponent or somewhere in the middle. That is the overriding strategic question for the Trump administration, as it will be for succeeding American administrations.
Peter Zalmayev, how will this be seen in Kyiv in the hours ahead? No doubt President Trump will inform President Zelensky of what was discussed. But, you know, just listening to our other guests as well, talking about the fact that the United States and Russia are now looking at a much wider relationship, how will all that be seen?
Well, of course, you know, once again, Donald Trump has said so many things that are, could be contradictory to each other. For example, he did say recently that there will be no fully restored economic relations with Russia while this war is going on. And he repeated this, as a matter of fact, after he said it a few months before. Once again, you know, he may change it tomorrow. We don't know. Obviously, it would be absolutely an anathema for Ukrainians and our European allies. Should Donald Trump go ahead and, let's say, lift sanctions or some sanctions before there's any breakthrough on the peace negotiations, right? That would be completely unacceptable. Of course, continuation of these talks without Ukraine and European allies at the table is also unacceptable. And any, of course, talk about land swaps. Donald Trump here with his buddy from real estate days, Mr. Witkoff, they are, you know, builders, right? They're in real estate, and they talk about Ukrainian territory quite cynically as about, you know, real estate land. Donald Trump was, as you heard, dismissive of Zelensky, President Zelensky's talk that, you know, Ukraine's constitution does not allow for that. He's like, what constitution? He does not seem to put too much weight on that. But this is a trap that Ukraine is very much aware of, that it could be walking into. If, let's say, President Zelensky says, yes, I'm willing to consider land swaps, this could actually bring him down. There will be a lot of armed men on the streets of Kyiv, maybe a third Maidan. We just don't know that. And if he says no to that, that allows Putin to point a finger at Ukraine and say, look, Ukrainians are the intransigent ones. They don't want peace. So once again, very, 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 you know, risky trap for us, but once again, very few details. And like the previous speaker said, we'll be watching for these signals coming out about what exactly was said and why Donald Trump said that this was indeed a productive meeting.
Peter, the challenge for Ukraine, once it is informed about what was discussed and what was agreed on, will be to, I guess, continue the negotiation. But what kind of leverage does Ukraine have to make sure that, you know, that the decisions are taken with its interests at heart?
Well, of course, let's not discount that there's still a very healthy support for Ukraine that is bipartisan, both Republicans and Democrats, and we saw a demonstration in support of Ukraine in Alaska, right, with people unfurling Ukrainian flags. For some reason, I did not see any Russian flags at all. So there's that. There's the mood on the street. There's the public opinion. Like I said, the support by both parties that Donald Trump has to reckon with. And of course, any poor peace that is imposed on Ukraine that is seen as appeasement and that sends us back to Munich 1938 will make Donald Trump look like not the artist of the deal, but an artist of a steal of Ukraine's territory. He does not want to look weak, and that is, I think, something that President Zelensky is quite ably playing on, right? He has warned about Donald Trump being in danger of being outfoxed by Vladimir Putin. This is a risky game because it also kind of angers Donald Trump, but Zelensky has been making those sounds. Of course, in the European allies, they had this preventative, preemptive call with Donald Trump to warn of the potential pitfalls of dealing with his much more experienced, savvy colleague in Moscow. So all these things have to be taken into account. And once again, the hope is that Donald Trump understands that he will not get that Nobel Peace Prize that he's after if a peace that he reaches with Ukraine is based on Ukraine's capitulation.
Dmitry Babich, this was a remarkably short press conference by these two leaders. I mean, they were talking about major issues that things like, security in Europe, security internationally, etc. It was a very short news conference. They did not take any questions. But let's listen to a little bit of what President Putin had to say.
The situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it.
So, Dmitry, here we hear President Putin say that Russia is sincerely interested in bringing an end to this. You talked about Russian security interests as well, and at the same time talking about Ukraine being a brotherly nation. Yet, it was Russia that invaded Ukraine.
Well, I mean, look at the bigger picture. The tragedy started in 2014. By 2022, when the Russian troops got involved, 15,000 people had already died. It's just remarkable what a short memory, the Western media has when they continue to forget what had been happening for 8 years before the so-called special military operation started. I think, although it is, of course, difficult to understand for an outsider, I think Putin was sincere when he called Ukraine a fraternal nation.
Yeah.
And indeed, what's going on is perceived in Russia as a tragedy. People are not happy about what's happening. And in Russia, it is perceived not as a fight for territory, but first, it's a matter of security.
Yeah.
Because what's going on is terrible. But imagine what would happen if Ukraine was filled with Western missiles and troops fighting Russia. Then we would have something like what is going on now between Israel and Gaza.
Right.
Right now, just a few
Dimitri,
percent of the population
I'm sorry,
dies.
I've got to interrupt you there because we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I want to get to William and Anton very quickly for their final words on this. William, very quickly, does President Trump face something of a job selling this domestically here in the United States?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the vast majority of Americans are quite pro-Ukrainian, and so it's quite a continuing snow job for many years now to try to convince them that Putin's acting in good faith. I mean, Putin invaded Ukraine twice, and the totality of the Western media didn't forget that at all. He took 20,000 child prisoners. He kills Ukrainian civilians every single day, including today with drone and missile attacks. And Ukraine wasn't a threat to Russia until Russia invaded again. So yes, I mean, whatever he's going to try to do, he has to sell But I think the bigger sales job is going to be to Europe. And if I could just one more quick point.
Yeah.
What your guest in Ukraine said is true, except that Europe can speak up about the trap.
Yes.
So swapping Ukrainian territory for Ukrainian territory,
Yeah.
Europe could eject loudly, and they should.
Right. Okay. I want to get to Anton. Anton, very quickly, where do you see this going to from here? I mean, this is now, the leaders have met. Do you see it going to lower level diplomats, bureaucrats to try and put together the nuts and bolts of a more comprehensive agreement?
That is exactly where it's going to go, and this is going to happen under the radar. We will hear from certain politicians here and there, but for the most part, after we hear the wave of reactions tonight and tomorrow from, of course, Ukraine first and foremost, it's their country, and then from Europe, then the real nitty-gritty of diplomacy will begin, and that is the dirtier, slightly more boring, although not in a bad way, but it's the kind of not attention-grabbing work,
Right.
but absolutely essential work that we need to move towards peace.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it for now. No doubt we'll be talking about this in the days and weeks ahead. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.